Things can change very fast in Formula 1, and that must be the feeling that Sergio Perez is going through right at this moment, as within the space of 2 races his World Championship hopes have evaporated, as Max Verstappen is now more than 2 race wins ahead of his Red Bull teammate. Just to put that gap into context, Perez could win the next 7 Grand Prix and still not lead the World Championship. That's how badly things have gone over the last couple of races. But you could say that this rough patch that Perez is going through was probably inevitable at some point during the season, because nobody expected him to sustain the championship challenge to Verstappen throughout the year. But nevertheless, he left Miami 13 points behind Verstappen in the World Championship. 2 races later, after the Spanish Grand Prix, he's now 53 points behind. And there were some people who generally felt that Perez could take the fight to Verstappen over the season, especially after he won the Azerbaijan Grand Prix and the sprint race during that weekend. But Verstappen has suddenly asserted his authority on this World Championship fight. He's now won the last 3 Grand Prix and looks set to win a 3rd straight World Championship. Perez has really talked himself up as a championship contender this year. And when we went into Miami, when he was just 5 points behind Verstappen in the standings, he had a spring in his step. He was full of confidence, and he really believed in himself that he could push Verstappen all the way for the World Championship. And it seemed as though the momentum was with him, especially when he put it on pole position after Max made a mistake on his first qualifying lap, and then the red flag was brought out during the second runs in Q3. But Verstappen's amazing comeback through the field from 9th on the grid to beat Perez in a proper head-to-head duel really probably will be looked upon as the defining moment of when the World Championship began to turn around in his favour. Since Max's win in Miami, he's rapidly pulled clear of Perez in the World Championship, to the point where his 2 victories in Monaco and Spain have built him an extra 40-point buffer over Perez. And this just isn't down to Verstappen's brilliance, it's also down to the fact that Perez has made mistakes on his side, such as his crash in qualifying in Monaco that left him at the back of the grid, and he wasn't able to recover during the race to get into the points. And then again in Spain, he had more troubles in qualifying, where he wasn't able to get into Q3. He only qualified in 11th. After initially struggling to make up places through the field, Perez eventually did finish in a strong 4th place, just 1 second off a podium. Perez has suddenly gone from looking like an outside bet for the World Championship to now looking like his hopes have completely disappeared. And this feels very reminiscent as to when Valtteri Bottas tried to fight Lewis Hamilton for the World Championship when they were both in a Mercedes in 2019. He was in a very similar situation to what Perez is in now, going up against a world champion teammate and trying to prove to everybody, including himself, that he was capable of pushing Hamilton all the way for that year's World Championship, even if he was looked upon as the weaker of the 2 drivers. And ironically, there are parallels between 2019 and 2023, specifically the opening few races. In 2019, just like Verstappen and Perez have done this year, Bottas and Hamilton won 2 Grand Prix apiece in the opening 4 races. And then it was Hamilton who began to pull clear as he went on a 4-race win streak. Bottas had been on the exact same amount of points as Hamilton after the opening 4 races, but by the time they got to the Austrian Grand Prix 5 races later, that gap had grown to 36 points. And by the summer break, just a few races later, Hamilton really had pretty much wrapped up the World Championship after Bottas had a difficult couple of races at Hockenheim where he crashed out, and Hungary where he was completely off the pace. Right now it feels like this story is playing out again in 2023, with Perez having initially been within just a few points of Verstappen, now seeing that gap grow to a point where it seems very unlikely that he will be able to turn it around. Comparing Perez's championship hopes to Bottas's in 2019, it almost feels like Perez has more of a mountain to climb than what Bottas did that year, because Perez hasn't really beaten Verstappen in a head-to-head fight, whether that be in qualifying or the race yet, because Verstappen has had problems, whether it be mechanical or he's made mistakes such as Miami, whereas Bottas was actually beating Hamilton comprehensively in some qualifying sessions and races. Look at his dominant win at the opening Grand Prix of that year in Australia and his qualifying lap in Spain where he was 6 tenths ahead of Hamilton. It was ironic that the media put the question to Bottas about Perez's hopes of beating Verstappen for this year's World Championship just a few races ago, and Bottas admitted that he knew exactly what Perez was going through in trying to put all of your energy into trying to beat your world champion teammate over the season. He obviously knows the situation very well. He knows just how physically and mentally draining it is to try and beat your teammate over a season. You have to go into each race bringing your A game. You have to be perfect. You've got the same car, the same opportunity and same equal machinery as your teammate, and you have to go out and beat them every single time. And this, more often than not, is a challenge that a driver simply is not able to pull off. The only exception really is Nico Rosberg, who beat Lewis Hamilton in the same car at Mercedes in 2016. Rosberg went into that year with a clear mentality of taking each race as it comes and not thinking too much about the bigger picture, which of course was the World Championship. And even when Hamilton went into that year's summer break with a 19-point lead, Rosberg did not lose sight or focus on the end goal. He decided to use the time to try and stay race sharp and try and gain any advantage he could, whether that be physically or mentally. And it would ultimately pay off because he won 5 of the last 9 races and stood on the podium at each of them, winning the championship in the end by 5 points. It would be easy for us to sit here and say that Perez needs to take the same approach as Rosberg, as it's the only real example we have of when a driver has gone up against a world champion teammate and initially lost in the head-to-head duels and then turned the form book around. But if it worked for Rosberg, there's no reason why it can't work for Perez. He needs to go away and focus on his weaker areas and probably just focus on himself, not to worry too much about what Max is doing on the other side of the garage. Because at the end of the day, Perez can only control his own destiny. He can't control what Max is doing. And we know that Max is going to be consistently strong at all the races because that's the type of calibre of driver he is. So what Perez needs to do is try and, if he can, raise his game, try and match what Verstappen is doing from a performance point of view, and more importantly try and take advantage of the days where Verstappen is off form, although they are a rarity. We know that street circuits are Perez's forte. That's where he feels most comfortable and where he's able to extract the most performance out of himself, but he needs to bring this kind of form to a more traditional type of circuit far more often. And on top of that, he needs to improve his qualifying. We know that consistently that has been one of his weaknesses over the years. But particularly since his move to Red Bull, there has been a noticeable improvement over one lap. But he does need to keep improving this area if he can. But if Perez is unable to raise his game to an acceptable level where he's able to take the fight to Verstappen, then maybe he just has to accept the realisation that he is the number 2 at Red Bull. As hard as it can be for a driver to accept this fact, it can be looked at as the smarter option. Perez at the end of the day has more bigger things at stake in his career, in particular trying to earn a new Red Bull contract with his current deal running out at the end of 2024. So he needs to keep performing to an acceptable level that deems him worthy of earning a new contract. As long as he's in the competitive car, we're always going to wonder if Perez is going to be able to raise his game year on year and try and beat Verstappen on merit, just like the number 2 drivers before him. We all know how good a driver he is and that he is deserving of this shot, but reality is quickly setting in that Perez is not up to the task of overturning that points deficit and beating Verstappen in the World Championship this year. He should simply enjoy, while he can, the fact that he is in a front-running car and that he is able to challenge for race wins and podiums on a consistent basis. Be sure to let me know in the comments what you make of Sergio Perez's title hopes. Are they all but over, or does he still have an outside shot? And what does he need to do to beat Max Verstappen? Also, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe on this video. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.